Today, I want to look at a passage in Philippians. We'll start there. Philippians chapter 1, verse 27, dealing with our conversation. Dealing with our conversation. It says in Philippians 1:27, "Only let your conversation be as it becometh the gospel of Christ, that whether I come and see you, or else be absent, I may hear of your affairs, that ye stand fast in one spirit, with one mind, striving together for the faith of the gospel." He talks about this, and you know, this is more of an old word. Modern translations use more modern words, and that's all fine. I don't have a problem with that at all. Or the one we use here, the King James Bible, uses this word conversation. And in modern English, this is sort of changed, and we don't really use that word the way they use that word. So it's important that we understand what it is he's saying. So conversation, using it, you know, the old word is, it's our living among others. Right? That's kind of what that word means, or the way in which we keep company. So it has to do with more of our actions, although it also includes our words. But it's like more than just like having a conversation, like a talk between two people over a phone. Your conversation is the way you live among people, the way you present yourself to the world, because that's what we do, right? We like to think that we just, you know, let it all hang out, but we really don't. Right? We get up in the morning and we think, okay, it's Sunday, and so I thought, you know, I probably shouldn't go to church and preach on Sunday the way I go to install toilet papers, right, at some high school. So maybe I should wear different clothing because I want to present a different image than say, hey, look, it's a toilet partition installer up there, right? Or whatever. And so we present ourselves, not just with our clothing, but ourselves. We present ourselves to the world in a way. And that's important to do. And that's what the Bible's talking about, in part, when it talks about our conversation. And Paul says that we need to have our conversation among people. And it needs to be in an honest way, in a good way, a proper way. And we all should be thinking about that. Are we presenting ourselves properly to the world? And this is for a number of reasons. I mean, you know, you could say, well, it's important because, you know, if you don't present yourself properly, then you're not going to succeed in life. And that's true. And this is something, you know, that modern society has, I think, failed largely to explain to the youth. Yes, you can, you know, have your hair any way you want, and you can wear the clothes any way you want, and you have those freedoms. But employers have a freedom to look at you and say, I don't think you're employable. Right? And so you may think, well, I don't think they should judge me, and you can have that opinion, but when it comes time to get a job, I think you ought to learn how to present yourself a little better. From the way you comb your hair, the way you dress, and the way you talk, and the way you present yourself, you should go there, and you should present yourself in a certain way if you want the job. Now, if you want to be a bum, and you want to live in the park, and you want to, you know, yell at the moon or whatever, well, then you can do that. It's America, you can do anything you want, but don't be surprised if you're in the park, living on a park bench and yelling at the moon. So you have to present yourself a certain way. If you young men think, man, one day I would sure like to have a pretty wife. Well, she's probably thinking, I would like to have a husband that's not an idiot, right? So if you want a pretty wife, you probably ought to present yourself in a way that, you know, might get you there, right? That might actually get some girl who you think is pretty interested in you. And this isn't about, you know, this isn't about putting on a facade. This isn't about, you know, a facade. This isn't about, you know, pretending to be something. This is saying, you know, there's all different parts of me, right? We're not just singular. There's all different kinds of different parts of me. And I need to minimize the ones that are more obnoxious, right? Push those down, tamp them down a little bit, and I need to maximize the ones that are more socially acceptable. And this is why we have different spheres of social connectivity, where we can be a little different than we are. So like, you know, when you're here at church, we would hope you're going to be less obnoxious. Right? We all should be striving to be less obnoxious here. And it's easy in our little churches to get very comfortable. And we have those of us, and of course, you know, some are guilty more than others, right? But we have those that think, well, we're all family, and so we can just act like we're family. No, do not do that. Do not do that. right? Because we're trying to get new people to come here, and if we all act the way we act in the family reunion, then they're going to say, wow, these people are weird and obnoxious, right? Because here we're trying to say, look, we understand there was people coming. They're from all different walks of life. They're from all different backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, all of that. And we can't just come here and just let it all loose the way we would in a very small social circle. Now, we have family, and that's very important. So me and my wife, we talk to each other and talk about things that I would not talk about, or I shouldn't. I tend at times to let that out, and then, I get chastised at home. But, I shouldn't. I should realize that, yes, I can talk with my wife about things and in ways that I shouldn't necessarily represent myself in other social environments. So we need to learn that. That's about learning appropriateness, right? And there's things that aren't appropriate. So when you go to work, there's a certain type of way of presenting yourself that's appropriate, even as Christians. And there's Christians that think, well, I'm a Christian and I'm gonna preach the gospel no matter where I am. And if they fire me for that, well, that's persecution for the cross. Well, no, it isn't. No, it isn't. You have a certain duty at work, right? And that duty means that when you're on your company time, you should be thinking about, and you should be talking about, and you should be pursuing the company's policies and the company's goals and for them to be profitable. That's what you've committed to do. And as a Christian, that should be your conversation at work. They're not paying you to preach. Now, if you want to be paid to preach, well, we just came out of a conference where they were looking for volunteers. And you can just go there right now. In fact, I would hit the door right now. Run over there and say, I'm ready. I'm going to Poland. But if you want to get paid to fill airplanes or install toilet paper holders or fix air conditioning or whatever it is you do, teach children at school, that's what you need to do during that time. That's your conversation there, right? And so we need to learn appropriateness on this. But dealing with our conversation as it pertains now to what Paul is talking about, it's important to understand that our conversation is a critical element of our faith. I find that it is disturbing and very sad that there are Christians who do not fully acknowledge, who do not fully appreciate that their conversation, their way they live, the way they present themselves to the world is as important to their faith, right, as knowing the Bible. That's right. And so we have Christians, and perhaps many of us are that or have been that at some time. I know that I struggle with this all the time. So, I think, well, I'm a Christian and I understand the Bible and I know these doctrines and I know what's right and I know what's wrong and I'm a preacher. But a tremendous amount of people have difficulties with me because I don't present myself properly in the world. And so my conversation does not align itself with my faith. And this is a problem. It's a problem in Christianity. And I think it's the epitome of this problem is where we start saying, well, nobody's perfect, right? I'm saved, not perfect. And while that may be technically true, it's really not being stated as a truth, but as an excuse, right, for saying my conversation isn't reflective of my faith. And rather than address that, I'm just gonna sweep it under the rug by saying I'm not perfect, so you just deal with me. Just deal with that. And that's not what we should do. Our conversation is critical to our faith, as I'm saying, because hypocrisy is not desirable. This is not a desirable thing. Now, you might think that's a self-evident proposition, but I've lived in many places in the world. I mean, not a lot of countries, but I've lived more than just here. In fact, like my dad was saying the other night at the mission conference, the first 10 years of my life, we lived in 22 different houses. And those houses weren't like down the block. Every 6 months, we packed everything we owned and we moved from Michigan to Texas or back again. It took me, 3 different kindergartens to get through kindergarten. That was because I was expelled, but that's a separate story. No, but we moved all over the place, right? And so I've seen a little bit different maybe than just this. If you've only lived in San Antonio, then you think, well, this would be this is a self-evident thing, hypocrisy is not good. But you realize that there are places, in fact, I've lived in places where hypocrisy is considered a good thing. To pretend to be one thing that you're really not is actually considered good behavior. It's considered to be politeness. Everybody knows that you're lying. Everybody knows you're misrepresenting yourself, misrepresenting your feelings. They all know it. They all accept it. But to be honest and say, this is what I feel about this, or this is what I think about that, very impolite. That's considered to be a social faux pas. So you might think, well, hypocrisy is bad. Of course it is, but not everyone sees it that way. But that's one thing we can say Paul is saying. Hypocrisy is not a desirable trait for Christians, particularly. Christians, we should have a desire to be on the outside what we are on the inside, right? We should have that. And I'm not saying that there aren't parameters and that there aren't, like I said, social spheres where certain things are more appropriate than others. So you'll have a certain level of conversation or a certain level of behavior towards intimate family where you can be a little more, where you can engage a little more of those less desirable qualities. And I think that's important. I think families, we need to tolerate each other in that. Right? I mean, all of us need a place where we can, give at least a little expression, right, to that, maybe that little bit of a viciousness that we tend to exhibit that we don't really want to. So we go to work and we can't do that because that wouldn't work out. But as families, you need to understand your husband, he needs to come home sometimes and vent a little. Right? Your wife, when you get home, she also wants to vent. So that's one of the problems, right? Because you're both venting at the same time sometimes about whatever. But we need that. You need a place where you can engage a little more of those areas of yourself that you repress a little because you say that's not acceptable. But our goal as Christians is to be transformed in the spirit of our minds. Right? And not just to repress those things, but to change those things in so much as we are able to. But overall, we are looking to be real. So when we talk about, presenting ourselves, let's say in the church in a certain way, in a way that's more appropriate to a church that's trying to win souls. And we need to think about that because we're saying we want to win some souls. We want people to come here. We want them to hear the gospel and we want them to get saved. Well, it's going to be very important that this church, every member here, present themselves to people coming properly. So let me just give you a very simple and basic example. If we have visitors come and everybody ignores them because it's very hard to talk to people you don't know, at least for most of us. For me, it's like excruciating pain, right? Actually, it's hard to talk to people I know. So maybe I'm not a good example. But no, it's very hard. You're like looking at them and they're looking at you and you're like, so how you doing? Fine. All right. I mean, what do you say? I don't know. I'm not the expert. Now, other people are very good at that. And so what do we need to do? Well, we need to learn to be welcoming within our abilities. We do. Because look, if people come here and they see that Christians don't really want them, and we shouldn't think that anybody else is any less observant than we are. Do you not know when you don't feel wanted? Of course you do. Right? So that's our conversation. Yeah, we want to preach the gospel to them, but if they don't feel welcome, if they don't feel that we care about them, then why would they listen to anything we have to say? Because what we have to say, they're not going to like. Right? It doesn't matter how nicely we word it. I'm not talking about getting up and raking people over the coals. You can be the most loving, caring, polite person in the world, but when it comes time to say, in some words, you are a sinner, and that has dire consequences, and you need to acknowledge that what you believe is wrong, and you need to accept Jesus Christ as your Savior, that is not easy to accept. And we need to not make it harder. And that's where our conversation comes in. But for that not to be hypocrisy, it has to be real. Now, this really is a bit premature on my part, and if I'm wrong, then you guys come up to me after the meeting and you correct me, because I'm not an expert on this, but I've been working on this for a little while. And so this isn't me telling you what a solution is. This is me telling you kind of what I'm kind of implementing and seeing if it'll work. So my problem with talking to people is I'm not interested in anything they have to say. I'm just not. It's like they're all boring to me, right? That's how I thought. Well, that's wrong, because people aren't boring. People are not boring. They're the most incredible thing that God created, people. From a matter of pure, just like looking at it from a mathematical standpoint, the pure complexity of this creation. There's nothing in the universe that even comes close to that. It's incredible. And so you find people boring, or I find people boring, because you're just not listening, right? And so anyways, I say, well, how can I overcome that? And so this is kind of where I'm at right now. So the way I think is, well, the problem is I'm not appreciating their value. Because anyone I appreciate their value of, no matter how mind-numbingly boring their conversation, their topic is, I listen to them. Because they're valuable to me, right? It matters what they say. And so, we need to have, how do we have a true and honest, sincere appreciation for people around us? Well, we need to start appreciating that they are made in the likeness and image of God, right? Which is the foundation of our system of equality. That they are loved by Jesus Christ equally as you, not less, and not differently. I think this is part of the reasons why Paul says that he was a debtor to every man. So it's important that when we talk about our conversation towards the world, towards the things around us, that it not be hypocritical. But I want to tell you that this is about much more than just our own integrity. When we talk about our conversation towards the world, specifically towards those that we would like to see saved, because this, I think, should be the prime effort, the most important effort of the church is for people to get saved. Yes, it's not the only thing. We need to teach doctrine. We need to console those that have trouble. We need to counsel those that have problems. These are all important. But at the top of the list of anything the church does, it has to be to win people. Because it's not because we're trying to win. We should be okay with the idea that we could talk to them, they could understand the gospel through our ministry, they get saved, and they go across the street to the Methodist church. That's fine. This is not the only church in town. That's for the delusional in the room, right? And this isn't the best church in town. That's for all the arrogant in the room. And so if somebody hears the gospel and they want to go to some other church and they feel that church ministers them more, that's fine. Our main interest is not to fill up chairs. There are plenty of evangelists in the world that I've met that have given me a tremendous example of this. They don't build churches. They just go down and talk to people and try to get people saved and send them to other churches, whatever church that might be. Find the best one that to their criteria and say, go to that church. And they're not looking to fill any buildings. They're not looking to build any ministries. They're just trying to get people saved. Now, there is nothing wrong with saying we want to build a church because we see value that can be added on top of salvation. And we want to be a part of that also. This isn't about I want to get people here so they can listen to me. If that's what we think, well, then we're very off course. Now, there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, we want people to be saved. And then we want them to understand some doctrines. And we think we understand certain doctrines that other Christians don't understand. Now, I am convinced that they understand some things I don't understand. There's no doubt about that. And we should learn from those things. We should not cocoon ourselves in here saying, we're not only the best church, we're the only church, and anyone else is absolutely wrong if they're not doing what we're doing. That's ridiculous. Now, we're going to act according to the best light we have, but we should be open to criticism and learning. But this is about more, like I'm saying, is about more than just the integrity of not being hypocrites. There's actually a very important component to our conversation as it pertains to this evangelism that I'm talking about. And I want to try to explain that today because to me it's fascinating that there's actually there's an intellectual foundation to why you need to get more concerned about your conversation. This isn't just about don't be a hypocrite. It's about much more than that. And I want to try to explain, and I hope I can get across what is in my mind and what has compelled me recently on this matter. So first, let me tell you that faith is believing what we cannot see. Now, I don't want to get into explaining, that I don't like the dumbed down version of that, which is basically, faith is blind belief. And, that's superstition. And we believe what we can't see, but it's not because we just trick ourselves into it. It's based on evidence and other things, but that's a different topic. But just to simplify it down, let's just take that phrase as true, right, with caveat. So faith is believing what we cannot see, and that really is what faith is. We believe in God and we don't see Him. We believe that Jesus died on the cross and we were not there. We believe He raised from the dead, and not only did we not see that happen, we've never seen that happen. That's right. You can go camp out in the morgue for years and probably will never see anything like that. So we believe things that we can't see. Now that is hard. That's a hard thing to do. When you are trying to give the gospel to your child or your neighbor or your coworker, or just some random person in the street, that is what you're asking them to do. Believe something you can't see. Now that's hard, and you should appreciate how hard that is. Not just because at one point you did it, but we tend to forget that, how hard that was. Once you see something, once you understand it, it's like simple. When I always had problems learning in school. Because I couldn't learn the way they were teaching it for some reason. And so they were trying to teach me the multiplication tables, and I couldn't learn them. They didn't make any sense to me. And then one day, I got, I don't know, of an epiphany, or God just had mercy on my pitiful self, or whatever it was. But all of a sudden, bam, they made sense. And then it was like simple. Now it's easy. And then when my kids were growing up, well, then I'm like mad at them. Why can't you get this? Right? Because I forget there was a time when I couldn't get that. And that's how we tend to be. But we need to not forget how difficult this is to believe something you can't see, to take somebody's word for something. I mean, think about how hard that is for you. Somebody you think has offended, you're offended with somebody. You think they said something bad about you. They come to you and say, I didn't say that. And you go, okay. Sure you didn't. No, just take my word for it. I didn't do it. Right. Sure. No, it's hard. It's hard. Someone tells you, look, this is what happened the other day over here. And you think, I don't know about that. You're probably like me. Whenever anybody, especially preachers, they tell me a story, all right, let's Google that. Right? Because they might be preaching right now, right? Not facting. So, let's look that up. Taking people's word for something is very difficult. We need to remember that. And preaching the gospel is to try to persuade people to believe. That's what we're persuading them to do. So when we go and talk to people and say, you're lost, and that condemnation has horrible, terrible consequences, and you need to be saved, right? What are we saying? We're saying, believe me on this. You don't see it. You can't comprehend it, but I'm telling you, the path you're on is leading to destruction. Doesn't look that way from here, but it is. That's a difficult thing to accept, and that's what we're trying to do. No matter who you are, if it's your child, you're telling them, take my word for it. You're trying to persuade them to believe something they cannot see. Not just what their eyes physically see. That's the least of it, in my opinion. It's see it, understand it, comprehend it. You understand that? This isn't like, okay, I fully comprehend it, but I have to put my finger in his hand. That's not what I'm talking about. That's not the difficulty. The difficulty is your mind cannot wrap itself around the idea of the gospel. And it can. It says that the carnal mind is enmity towards God and does not understand spiritual things. So you're taking somebody who is at odds with God and has complete disregard for everything that's spiritual, cannot comprehend any bit of it, and you're saying, just take my word for this. That is so incredibly hard. We should be surprised when people convert quickly. I know we kind of get frustrated. You're like, I've been talking to this friend of mine for like 2 years, and they don't want to believe. Believing is an impossible feat. This is not something easy. That's why it says it's a gift from God. It is a miracle that someone could even believe. That's right. Consider that somebody could just commit themselves to something they do not comprehend at the moment. I'm not saying that they don't understand the basic points that you're making, but to comprehend that kind of a life that you'd be committing to, it's incredibly, incredibly hard, and that's what we're trying to persuade people to do. We're saying, take my word for it and commit your entire life to this notion that you can't comprehend. That's faith, and that's hard. So believing what we cannot see is hard. We need to remember that. However, if we're going to be saved, and if you are here today and you're not saved and you want to be saved, you have to understand that you must take a leap to faith. And that leap to faith is based on the conversation of others. How do you do that? How do you go from that incredible, excruciating difficulty of not being able to comprehend what you're being asked to commit to? Well, you say, well, you have to have faith. You just have to step out there and say, I'm going to do it. And why would you do that? It has a lot to do with the conversation of the people around you. Yes, it does. A lot to do with that. Why is it then that Paul says, if that's not the case, why did Paul say, how will they believe unless someone goes and preaches to them? It's not if, somehow preaching gets to them. The actual person being there, he said, is important. Yes. Why is it that Jesus set up a church? Why did Jesus set up a church? Because we need to gather together. Why? Why do we need to do that? Because so much of what we're called upon as Christians to believe, to accept, is based upon the conversation of others. I think this is what Paul is referring to in this verse. Now, there's a lot of discussion over what this actually means, this phrase. It's a deep phrase, and I could be wrong on this, but this is what I think he's saying here. He says, for therein is the righteousness of God revealed from faith to faith. The way I believe he's saying is that basically faith is a contagion. That to get faith, you need to be around people of faith. And it seems to me to hold true. However, there is less subtle explanations of this in the Bible. For instance, in 1 Peter 3:1, talking to women, it says that are married to unsaved men, it says, likewise, ye wives, be in subjection to your own husbands, that if any obey not the word, they also may without the word be won by the conversation of the wives. This is particularly meaningful for any of us who have ministered in places where there's a large demographic of women married to unsaved men. And like Mexico churches, this is very common. Very common. And it's very common for them to think, I need to preach to my husband. I need to tell him that he's going to hell. And we always tell him, no, don't do that. That really doesn't generally work. Now, it may work sometimes, but generally speaking, that's not a good idea. And that's not what Peter says you should do either. So Peter says, why don't you just be the very best version of yourself you're capable of being? Be the best wife you can be the best mother you can be the best employee you can be if you have a job outside the home, be the best housekeeper you can be if that's your job. Whatever it is wherever it is yours to do it to the very utmost of your ability. And let them see that conversation. Now, we've experienced a lot of this, like I say, and we've seen both sides. And I'll tell you from my anecdotal experience, the women who do it this way have far better success rate. Not just women. Men who have unsaved wives, same thing. They say, I'm going to make her come to church. Well, first of all, you can't do that legally. That's stupid. What are you going to do? What are you talking about? You're going to make somebody come to church. That's called kidnapping. You can't make somebody come to church. Well, I'm going to, no, don't do that. Be the very best husband you can be. Yes. Let her be what she wants to be. Let her believe what she wants to believe. Don't preach to her. Don't come home telling her how terrible it is. Be the best husband you can possibly be so she can see your conversation. It works for parents. We in San Luis Potosí had a church that was like 60 or 70 people, and they were all youth. They were all under 18 years old almost. There's a couple people that were like 20. But there were no adults in the church. Like I've said, it's like the church was the Neverland church. And I was Peter Pan. But the same thing. Don't go preaching to your parents. Just learn to be a good son and a good daughter. Let them see your conversation. It works for your boss. It works for your coworkers. It works for everything. You think, well, I keep telling them things, they don't believe me. Why don't you try just living the gospel? I'm not saying that there isn't a time in which we need to speak. Anyone who knows me knows that's not what I'm advocating. But just like there's a time to speak, as it says in Ecclesiastes, there's also a time to converse. And I feel that too many times we don't identify when's the proper time for our conversation. To let our actions speak for us. Our attitudes, our behaviors. All of this is to say that we must integrate our faith into our being. Why is our conversation lacking? Why is our conversation lacking? Well, it's because our faith is not very deep. That's why. We have faith in that portion of our brain that's responsible for our conscious cognitive thinking, and that's why we like doctrine a lot. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But there's other portions of your brain, other portions of your mind that are not that, and you have not integrated faith into them. And so you find that when you enter into those realms and those parts of your brain are more in control of you, you find that faith is a lot less evident. And it's because we focus, and that's a problem, I think, in I call it our brand of Christianity, or whatever, whatever you want to call it, our little circle of Christians that we kind of associate with, right? The churches in Mexico and Oak Knoll and all these. I think that's a problem with us. We're real focused on all the truths, right? And that's good. I think other Christians should focus a little more on them. I don't mean all of them, many do. But there are some I've met that are like, we just love Jesus. And you think, oh, that's terrible. No, that's really not terrible. That's actually pretty good. But we kind of focus in. We're like, because faith is like huge in that portion of us. But there's other parts of our life that matter too. And our conversation really is not oriented in the world according to our cognitive ability. That's why there's always such conflict between you in yourself. right? You do things that when you think about them for a moment, you say, I don't know why I did that. Because if you would have thought about it, then that cognitive pace where faith dwells richly in it, right, you wouldn't have done it. That's why when you take a moment, and we always say, don't react. Take a moment and think about it, because when you do that, you'll stop yourself from doing a lot of stupid things. Right. Terry taught on that the other day here. Being slow to speak, slow to react. Why? Well, one problem is that our reaction centers, we haven't integrated faith nearly as well as we have in our cognitive centers of our brain. Yeah, that's right. And that's a serious problem that we need to address. And then we need to look at Christians who do that, because I've met them. And doctrinally, in my mind, they're pygmies. And I'm not trying to be mean about it, but they just don't care about that. And it's not that that's my interpretation. I'm talking about the very extreme cases when they tell me we don't care about doctrine. My parents were in a church like that when I was young. We don't care about doctrine. We don't talk about it. Doctrine is death. We want life. That was their thing. And that's fine. I'm not trying to criticize. I'm just saying. But they were rich in faith in those areas where I find myself poor in faith. And I find that because I'm poor in faith in those areas, my conversation is not what it should be. Because it doesn't just come from the cognitive centers of my thinking. And so we need, as Christians, you say, how can I have a more robust conversation in the world? How can I have a conversation that truly magnifies Jesus and truly exhibits, right? Exhibit A of the gospel. How can I do that? I'm asking people to believe something they don't comprehend. Why would they do that? And I think that's one reason why we see that our criticism many times goes unheeded, whether it be in the gospel or in anything. You go and you tell somebody, hey, you're doing wrong. Ha! And they don't take it. And you're like, what's wrong? Why can't you take criticism? But they say, well, look at you. You say I shouldn't do that, and you just did it. And you do it all the time. You say I shouldn't steal, like Paul says, and yet you're a thief. Why would I listen to you? Now look, there is something to be said about truth. Truth, no matter who tells it to you, it's still true. That's why Jesus said of the Pharisees, do whatever they tell you to do. Because they're sitting on the seat of Moses. Their doctrine is right. But don't do what they do. Because they're not living it. Right? They're hypocrites. But it doesn't mean that what they're saying is wrong. So I'm not telling you that we look at people's life and if they don't live their life right, then you can disregard it. It's not true. No, you disregard at your own peril. However, from looking at it from the other perspective, us speaking out, if we want to have an impact with people, we can't be hypocrites. Because people look at the integrity of our faith. So we tell people that they should live a committed life. But do you live a committed life? We tell people they should live a pure life. But do you live a pure life? Do I live a pure life? You say, well, it's still true even if I don't do it. That's true. It's still true. And it's still ineffective. Yeah, that's right. If you want to be an effective witness, if I want to be an effective witness for Christ, I need to integrate these things, right, into every aspect of my life so that they just bubble out through my conversation. And then people say, then when you tell somebody, I know it's hard. I know it's impossible. You can't do it. At least in your mind you can't do it. You think I can't do it. But just do it. You're standing at a precipice. It's pitch black down. And you tell them, if you step off of that ledge, you won't fall. That's essentially what Paul said. That's what God said. He who believeth in me shall not be ashamed. That took tremendous faith to believe that. It does. You think if I do that, it's going to go horribly wrong for me. And God is saying, no, it won't. Just trust me. I know you can't see it. You can't comprehend it. You think if I believe, it's going to be terrible. But he's saying you will not be ashamed. Step off the ledge and you won't fall. And they say, why would I believe you? And you say, because I've done it. I stepped off the ledge. We stand at the edge of that darkness and we reach out and say, I did it. I'm here. It works. Trust me. Think of these parents that have their kids, they put them up on something, they saying, jump. I'll catch you. Now, my kids should have never done that because I was like, ha ha, don't ever trust anybody. No, but you say, jump. I'll catch you. And it's so hard. The kid isn't thinking, of course he's going to catch me. Who has to pay the doctor bills if he doesn't, right? They don't think, they're not logically sophisticated that way. They're just thinking, ooh, that's scary. But their brother says or their sister says, no, look, and they do it. Whew. And they see that and go, wow, it does work. It does work. That's what we're doing with our conversation. We're telling people, commit yourself to the gospel. It works. How do you know? Because look, watch me. I'll do it. It works. See, look, I'll do it. I'll do it every day. I'll live that life every day. And you'll see every day that I'm living that life of commitment to Christ, and it works. People have justified and reasonable objections to the gospel. They're reasonable. They're reasonable fears, I should say. That would be a better way of putting it. We shouldn't dismiss them out of hand because it's an incredibly hard thing to do. What do we do then to convince them? We live it.
Yeah, that's right.
You get there and you say to that ledge and they say, I don't think I can do it. Say, look, watch, I'll do it for you. And you do it. Watch, I'll be faithful to my wife. You can do it. Look, watch, I'll take the derision of the world and the mocking. I'll do it. Watch, you can do it. It's possible. Because I'm living it. I think our ineffectiveness, I suspect, our ineffectiveness in the gospel is our poor conversation. I listen to our sermons and our people that are talking. I'm not just talking about from a pulpit, but I mean just everybody. We're talking the gospel. I think we've honed that message. I'm not saying there's not a lot of room for improvement and adaptation to modern developments in the world, but generally speaking, on a basic level, we've honed the gospel message over 2,000 years. I think we got that down. Why is this so ineffective? Think, well, the world's changed. I'm not sure about that. I think Christianity has changed. I think Christians have changed. I look in the book of Acts and I see Christians who probably were not as doctrinally sound as we are, perhaps. Not obviously speaking of the apostles, but, these new churches, Galatians, Corinthians. We know we're more doctrinally sound than them because we learn from their mistakes, so we're better already. And yet, look at the effectiveness they had in the gospel. Why was that? Well, maybe their conversation was more integral with their faith. Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 12, "For our rejoicing is this, the testimony of our conscience, that in simplicity and godly sincerity, not with fleshly wisdom, but by the grace of God, we have had our conversation in the world, and more abundantly to youward." We've had our conversation in the world. That's our clean conscience. That we have taken the things we believe and profess, and we have lived them in a way that was meaningful to other people so that they could overcome their natural and reasonable fears that they have of believing the gospel and committing themselves blindly to Christ. So in a sense, when we ask them to believe by faith, and when I'm asking you here right now, if you're here today and you're not saved, I'm telling you, you need to get saved. You need to repent of your sin. You need to accept that Jesus Christ came to this world, died, was buried, and rose again 3 days later because God raised him from the dead, and that sacrifice is propitiation, satisfaction. God looked on that and was satisfied and is willing to forgive you. And all you have to do is ask him. And I'm telling you, you need to believe that. You say, that's a very hard thing to believe. It doesn't make sense to me. I can't comprehend it. I'm telling you, believe it. I know you can't see it. I know it doesn't make a lot of sense to you, but believe it. Why should you? Well, I would hope that you can look around this room, maybe not in me, I hope in me, but maybe not, but in somebody you know and say, I know a real Christian. My uncle is a real Christian. My neighbor is a real Christian. My boss or my employee or my dad or my sister, they're real Christians and they live it. And while I can't comprehend it, they're standing in that place where I thought it would be impossible to stand. So I'm going to take that step. If you're here today and you haven't taken that step of faith out into that unknown, we want to talk to you. We don't want to preach to you. We don't want to beat you over the head. We're not trying to convert you. We want to have a conversation with you. We do, for your sake. And so far as you're willing, we're not going to hold you there. We're not going to, if you say, you know what, I got to go, you're welcome to go. We're not going to monopolize your time. You're not committing to an hour of listening to a religious spiel. We just want to talk to you. We want to hear what your problems are, what your fears are, what your doubts are. And maybe we might be able to answer them, not from some egghead book of answers, but say, you know what? I was there one time, and it was scary for me too. In fact, I couldn't see where I was going. But somebody reached out from that darkness and said, take that step. It's light over here. And I did. And I stepped into the light. They were right. You can be saved too. So if you're here today and you want to talk to one of us, we're going to be back here at the back of the room after the services. Just come up to me or anyone else that you feel comfortable with and say, I would really like to talk about that. And we'll talk with you. However long that is that you have available for that or interest for that, talk to you. If you have any questions at all, it doesn't have to be about salvation. Any at all. We want to help you. That is what we are here for today.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
Don't call me tomorrow at work. Talk to me now. All right.